Thank you, Peter, so much for coming and talking to us today. So in the run-up to the Kathleen Stock event at the Oxford Union, there were petitions and counter-petitions. There were people who said the event shouldn't go ahead at all because just allowing her to speak was transphobic. And you yourself resigned from a position at a university, as Kathleen did, because your situation became untenable. So how did you feel looking at these scenes unfolding? And did you feel that your situations compared in a way?
My first thought when I saw that is, there are no guns here in this country, largely. So my first thought was, oddly, as an American perspective, somewhat relieved that I knew that she was not going to get shot, because I always think about that when I do events in the United States. My second perspective was, what a stain on the institution. What a stain that the Oxford Union, whose entire purpose is to have debates, would have to deal with a very small group of megalomaniacs who want to limit the speech of others. Now, if they don't want to go, that's fine. There should be no compulsion. Nobody should force them to go. The problem is that they want to force other people not to go. They want to shut down. It's a new type of totalitarianism, and it's a new type of authoritarianism.
So more than 40 academics signed a petition in favour of Kathleen being allowed to speak. And in that petition, they said that they believe that the university exists to promote the disinterested pursuit of truth via reasoned argument. But that seems to be, what is really being disputed here. There are some people who believe that the university is for the disinterested pursuit of truth, and there are other people who take this sort of safetyist perspective. But it's more than just safetyism, isn't it?
I think it's their moral mind overriding their rational mind. I think they have a kind of hyper-moralism, and that shuts off or completely seals or closes any hope that they can evaluate reasoned evidence or argument, because they hold those positions for moral reasons. Now, when you said there were 40 people, I'd like to know how many people in total were on the faculty and 40 signed. In my experience, of course, this was when gender ideology was not in its infancy, but it hadn't matured to the level of derangement that it has now. There wouldn't be a single person who would have signed that. So you can tell that the tide is turning, and it's not just a across the pond thing. The tide is turning on the ideology. So the fact that 40 people signed it all is interesting.
So you were also involved in what came to be known as the gender studies hoax, where you and some of your colleagues submitted essentially fake journal articles that were accepted by peer-reviewed journals, and it showed up the academic industry really to be completely bankrupt. And yet nothing seems to have happened. There haven't been any consequences as a result of that, except for the people who were involved in submitting those journal articles in the first place. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think we won the battle but lost the war. I think the ideologues who are pushing out propaganda, there's no politic way to say it. These are moral impulses by ideologues. And the people who have pushed this out and are driving this in peer-reviewed journals, they're not doing that because they have good evidence for what they believe. They're doing it because they want to forward moral ideas. That's the key to this whole thing. And when you understand that the movement, wokeism, critical social justice, whatever you want to call it, this is fundamentally a moral movement. It's not based upon evidence. So, for example, from what we talked about before, trans women and women's sports, it's not as if there are no gotchas. So it's not as if you can give physical characteristics of the average male, physical characteristics of the average female, and say, aha, see, gotcha. Biological men should not compete in women's sports. No, because for the people who are in the orbit of the ideology, trans women are women. They're just women, period. And it doesn't matter what the evidence is. The belief is a moral belief. And that if you do not understand that, you simply cannot understand gender ideology. Mm-hmm. The propositions of gender ideology are forwarded for moral reasons. They are not based in evidence. And not only are they not based in evidence is completely irrelevant to making one change one's minds about the moral belief.
Now, there'll be many people watching, viewers at home, who have friends, family, loved ones with whom they find it very difficult to have conversations about these sorts of issues. What advice would you have for them in terms of having these impossible conversations?
That's a great question. It's actually astonishingly easy to do. The first order of business, I can lay out a little plan. The first order of business is to listen to somebody and to actually understand what they're saying and why they believe what they believe. The problem is that there's simply not enough listening. So it's not just that I listen to you, it's that I want to repeat back to you, oh, do I have this right? See, I put the burden on myself. Do I have this right? Am I understanding this right? And if they say no, try to figure out what you're not getting. So there's a little template. So the first order of business is to listen, right? Then you want to repeat back to people what they believe. And then you want to try to figure out why they believe what they believe. Like, what got them there? What was it? A reason? Was it something somebody said to them? Now, the good thing about that is there are only so many reasons people can believe things. Mm-hmm. They believe it because somebody told them. They believe it because they saw it on the internet. They believe it because they feel it in their heart to be true. There are only so many reasons. So once you figure that out and you follow the template, so you've listened, you've repeated back, and you all this time you're just asking questions. And then you have the two questions that I love the most are, how confident are you that that's true? On a scale from 1 to 10, how confident are you that that's true? And with 1 being, I'm not at all confident, which no one will say because they won't believe it, but give them a scale. 5 being, a medium confident. 7 being, I'm very confident. 10 being, I'm unshakably confident. I am 100% positive. So then you have a scale. And so let's say that someone says that there are 9. So you're talking about a trans issue, what have you. Trans women in men's bathrooms or women's bathrooms. So you follow the template, you've listened, you've made sure that you've understood, you've asked them to put it on a scale. And then you ask, so if there are 9, you say, okay, so what would it take what evidence would you have to hear to make you a 7? Like, what would change your mind? And then you listen. So that whole time, the main piece of advice I would give is you're listening and you're asking questions. You're not delivering your truth. You're not delivering your message. You're just trying to figure out why someone believes what they believe.
We saw with what happened at Oxford that it wasn't all bad news. The Oxford Union actually held its ground. There were people who spoke out in favour of free speech and in favour of Kathleen Stock being allowed to air her views and talk at the union. So how optimistic are you that the situation is, potentially getting better, or do you think that, the worst is yet to come?
The tide is turning, but the institutions are also captured. So in the academy, for example, you have people with jobs for life. It's called tenure. You cannot get them out once they're in. There's no question that the tide is turning. There's also no question about what damage it will do to our institutions before we finally extirpate the last vestiges of madness. The thing that's really important to understand is that this ideology is simply too idiotic to sustain. It's just simply too stupid. Everybody knows what a woman is. I'm looking at you, you're a woman. You know what a man is. You know that men have no place in women's spaces. You know that if a man goes into your bathroom, that individual is not there for, nothing positive is coming out of that. So the ideology itself is it's just too idiotic to sustain itself. And all it takes is a small group of people and then hopefully followed by a critical mass of people who stand up and say, no, we're not going to take this anymore. This is too deranged.